Chapter 1. Ethan Sterling had always been deeply devoted. I had simply met that girl once, and he drove his car straight at me. I couldn't help but ask, "Are you that much in love?" Ethan coldly replied, "She can take a knife for me. Can you?" I gave a sudden laugh. "Definitely not." Chapter 1. Ethan Sterling had a mistress he was hiding from me. He hid her for half a year, and I didn't discover her. Until a week ago, when I was on my period, he abruptly said, "You don't seem to suffer much each time." I paused, immediately understanding that the bastard must have someone he cared about who suffered terribly during their period. So, I pretended to be casual and said, "Dr. Lee has been treating me. A few doses of medicine and I'm fine." Ethan's face didn't change color, his heart didn't skip a beat, and he indifferently ahed in response. 3 days later, I went abroad, and he took a girl there, protecting her. The photo that landed in my hands was so blurry that I couldn't even make out their faces. But Ethan's state of cherishing her was clear as day. It wasn't surprising that Ethan would cheat. What surprised me was how much he cared. What kind of girl could she be? Harboring this curiosity, I returned home without Ethan's knowledge. I had old man Fitz drive me straight to where Ethan was hiding her. As luck would have it, Ethan was just getting out of his Cullinan, tossing his high-end custom suit into the car, grabbing a cheap jacket to put on. Then he put on a pair of glasses, messed up his hair, and picked up his laptop bag. I couldn't help but laugh. Is he impersonating a low-level coder? A programmer? Old man Fitz lowered his head, as quiet as a mouse. When Ethan went upstairs, I pushed open the car door. "You wait here, I'm going up to take a look." "Miss Shen, what are you afraid of? He can't kill me, can he?" "He wouldn't kill you, but..." Chapter 2. Everyone knew that if I went up there and exposed things wouldn't end well between Ethan and me. Especially in the last 2 years, the conflicts between us had been increasing. Cold wars, arguments, smashing things, that was all commonplace. The most recent time was half a month ago. I forgot why. In the end, I directly grabbed a glass and smashed it at him. He could have dodged it, but he didn't. He let the bright red blood flow down his forehead. His gaze was extremely cold. "Do you have any resemblance to who you used to be?" How laughable. I'm not the same as before, but is he the same as before? It's only natural for him to change. It's unforgivable for me to change? Knock, knock, knock. I knocked on the door. Ethan opened the door. A gentle smile still lingered on his face, and he looked inside. "Let it be, I'll handle it." Turning back, the moment his eyes met mine, the smile shattered into pieces, and the soft gaze solidified into hard ice. The fluidity of the change in his expression could definitely be included in film school teaching materials. "Who is it?" A charming girl poked her head out from behind Ethan. When her eyes met mine, I was taken aback. Ethan stepped aside slightly. "You go inside first." His deep, serious voice made the girl a little taken aback. A smile crept onto the corners of my mouth. I took a step forward and extended my hand. "Hello, I'm Ethan Sterling's colleague. I have some work-related matters to discuss with him." Ethan glanced at me faintly, tacitly agreeing to my statement. "You stay at home, we'll talk outside." "Is it inconvenient? Am I disturbing Mrs. Sterling?" The girl's face flushed red, and she waved her hands repeatedly. "No, I'm not Mrs. Sterling, we haven't." "Not married yet? Then it must be soon. I'll definitely ask for a glass of celebratory wine then." The girl's face turned even redder, and she glanced at Ethan shyly. The smile on my face widened. "By the way, my name is Shannon Fisher, what's yours?" "Lily Waters, nice to meet you." Chapter 3. Lily Waters, 19 years old, a student at Harvard, excellent in academics and all-around talent. This was all the information I could find. The rest was hidden by Ethan. In the end, I didn't get to enter their home. Under Ethan's extremely cold gaze, I obediently followed him downstairs. "How did you get here? Why didn't you tell me you were back? How long have you known?" Ethan took a deep breath of his cigarette. "What do you want?" I chuckled. Finally getting to the point. "What do you think I should do?" Ethan tilted his head to look at me. "What's between her and me isn't as dirty as you think. Her health is not good, I'm taking care of her, nothing more." I said, "Oh. What if I don't believe it?" Ethan's face immediately darkened. My whole body lost its gentle and warm appearance. Getting out of the car, I slammed the door shut. "Shannon." I turned around. The next second, the roar of the engine sounded. Ethan held the steering wheel with one hand, and as the car sped towards me, his eyes were fixed on me. Watching my pupils dilate, my body stiffen. The screech of the brakes. The front of the car pressed against my knees, bringing the car to a halt. My mind went blank, and in that instant, it felt like thunder exploded in my ears. The car reversed, turned around, and drove to my side. Ethan looked up at me. "Don't touch her." This was not a request. This was a warning. Miss Fisher, are you okay? Old man Fitz stumbled over, his face ashen, his eyes filled with terror. The moment I fell, I suddenly understood that it wasn't my imagination, he really wanted to kill me. Chapter 4. Ethan Sterling had never been a benevolent saint. He's a nobody without even a middle school education. He got to where he is now by being ruthless to others, and even more ruthless to himself. When I was 6 years old, my deadbeat dad used the excuse of taking me out to play to meet his mistress. They were tumbling in the suite, while Ethan kept watch over me in the living room watching Tom and Jerry. I didn't understand why there were moaning sounds coming from the bedroom. Curiously, I asked, "Brother, what are Daddy and Auntie doing?" He turned up the volume and covered my ears. "It's dirty, don't listen." He was only a year older than me, but he took care of me meticulously. It wasn't that he liked me that much. His mom told him that as long as he took good care of me, she would give him $100. That was his week's living expenses. When I was 14, my dad ran off with his mom. My mom lit a fire and burned down the house. Ethan carried me out of the fire. Half of his arm still bears the scars from the burns. He had no money to study and dropped out of school to work. I smashed his house with a baseball bat and compensated him with $20,000. He still didn't go to school, running to Yunnan to buy medicinal herbs and mountain goods. He used the first money he earned to buy me a princess dress. That year I was 15, he was 16. My mom was hysterical. "Your dad ran away with that bitch, and you still want to be with the bastard child born to that bitch. You really are your dad's seed. We should have strangled you when you were born." It seems I really should stand on my mom's side. But unfortunately, I was raised by Ethan. In those years when my dad was busy philandering and my mom was busy catching him, I lived like an oddity, and Ethan accompanied me without asking for anything in return. He could be dirty, but I had to be clean. He could be bruised and battered, but no one could touch a single hair on my head. He didn't allow me to tell anyone about our relationship because he was afraid he couldn't protect me. He was most afraid of me crying, always clumsily wiping away my tears. Ferociously ordering me to hold back my tears. But later, when I really didn't cry anymore, he didn't seem that happy either. "Actually, if you cried and made a fuss, I would have given in to you. Why do you have to be so tough with me?" Chapter 5. I lay in the hospital for a day and a half. Wes Crane told me to keep playing dead. "Okay, give me a cigarette. Smoking is prohibited in the hospital." "Then I want to be discharged." "Can't you just quit smoking? Is that supposed to be convenient? I might as well just die." Wes rolled his eyes, not wanting to deal with me. "What's going on between you and Ethan? Normally, if you scraped a little skin, he would be making a big fuss. How come he didn't even show his face this time?" I sneered. Finally asked. "Must have been holding that back." Kyle Rivers rushed into the hospital as I was about to leave, almost colliding with me. His eyes were full of anxiety, and his face was a little pale. "Shannon, are you okay? Why are you here? Are you hurt anywhere? Who told you to come back? Where's Ethan? Is the business finished? I want to kill him." Not a single word I wanted to hear. I kicked him in the leg. He didn't dodge, obediently taking it, and even bent over to put his head in front of me. "Shannon, I was wrong." I lightly slapped him. "Did old man Fitz tell you?" "No, I found out myself. This kid is getting more and more perceptive, and his abilities are getting stronger as he gets older. He even dares to investigate me. How are things going in the South? They can handle it." After speaking, he was still a bit unconvinced. "It's impossible for me not to come back." I laughed in exasperation. "Okay, you can." Kyle followed behind me, whimpering and begging for forgiveness. We ran into Ethan head-on. His expression was indifferent, holding Lily. "So, now that I've exposed them, he's not hiding it anymore?" Kyle was stunned for a few seconds, then with a ferocious face, he was about to rush forward, but I kicked him back. Wes stood to the side, his face alternating between green and white. Quite the love triangle scene. "Shannon, are you not feeling well either?" Lily's pure voice broke the stalemate. I smiled at her. "Small problem, what's wrong with you?" She was a little embarrassed. "I have a scar on my body, I want to see if it can be removed." I understood, with how advanced medicine is now, it definitely won't be a problem. "A beautiful girl like you shouldn't have flaws." Lily's face turned red. "Shannon, you are also very beautiful." Ethan tightened his grip on her hand. "We have to go, the specialist is waiting." "Goodbye, Shannon." As we passed by, Ethan politely nodded at me. Great. Purely nodding acquaintances. On the way back, Kyle's face was as black as the bottom of a pot. I couldn't help but tease him. "What, if I didn't stop you, you would really fight with Ethan?" "Shouldn't I? Aren't you afraid of him now?" He pursed his lips. "Shannon, you should break up with him." "Ha! Silly kid." Chapter 6. Kyle was someone I picked up in the stairwell when I was 20 years old. He was 11 then, locked out by his biological father and stepmother. Wearing spring clothes in the dead of winter, shivering with cold, his body covered in bruises. Grabbing my pant leg, he murmured that he was hungry. So, I took him home, made him a bowl of noodles, and added a hot dog. At that time, Ethan and I were in a very bad place. He didn't allow me to interfere in his affairs, telling me to obediently study hard. But he was always getting hurt. I couldn't stand it. Money, that mere pittance, was really taking lives. I compromised with my mom, saying that I had broken up with Ethan and wanted to go home and inherit the family business. My mom mocked me. But she also understood that the shares left by my grandparents could only be controlled by me. She hated me. But she also needed me. Unable to do anything to me, she recorded my words and played them for Ethan. Ethan didn't believe it. He trusted me. So, he was extremely remorseful. Remorseful that he didn't protect me well. The more remorseful he was, the more we argued. From arguing about things to arguing about emotions. Then making up. Over and over again. Kyle was an accident. I intermittently fed him for half a year. Ethan didn't care, nor did he mind. But because he always had a cold and indifferent expression, Kyle was always afraid of him. Later on, Kyle's relationship with me was discovered by his father. Those cloudy eyes, lasciviously looking me up and down, the desire in them clearly visible. Kyle probably heard something. He bought a knife with his last pocket money. Afraid and desperate. I made him a bowl of noodles, took the knife away, and told him not to worry about anything. I let the man into my house, tore my clothes, and pinned me on the bed. I watched the woman follow in. They fought together, and the man stabbed the woman in the stomach. He fled, taking all the cash from my safe. The newly installed surveillance recorded the entire process. He was caught, sentenced, heavily sentenced. This was, to me at the time, a very perfect calculation. Ethan, however, didn't say a word, silently applying medicine for me. After a long silence, he spoke. You shouldn't use yourself as bait. What am I going to do if something happens to you? These were the words that went into my heart at the time. But in fact, there was another sentence that I only came to understand many years later. He said, "You're dirty, go take a bath." Chapter 7. I was reading in the living room when Ethan came back. "Why aren't you asleep yet?" "Waiting for you." Quite a knowing question. He knew I was waiting for him. Okay, here's the next part of the translation. Just as I was sure he would come back. There was no other reason, except that I had pulled Lily Waters' medical records. Ethan paused in the act of putting down his keys. He tore off his tie and sat down opposite me. "What do you want to talk about?" Such composure was quite frustrating. I quietly looked at him. What if I told Lily everything? Ethan raised his head, his eyes filled with cold light. "I told you, don't touch her." "What if I insist?" "What will you do? Not hit the brakes and run me over?" "Shannon, I won't touch you. But I can touch a lot of other people." These words made my face fall. The moment I stood up, the book slammed to the ground with a dull thud. I picked up the baseball bat. "I cannot touch her." "An arm or a leg, you choose." Ethan stood up. After a long stare, he held out his left hand. Without any hesitation, the baseball bat fell heavily. I heard the sound of bones breaking. Ethan's face turned white, and he grunted. He gritted his teeth and looked at me. Word by word. "Satisfied? Get out." He walked out, supporting his arm. I couldn't help but ask, "Is she that special?" Ethan stopped, blurting out. "She can take a knife for me, can you?" In an instant, the entire atmosphere went quiet. I looked at Ethan's back, which was very tense. He hurriedly turned around. His face was even whiter than before. His lips moved. But I laughed. Lazily leaning back. "Definitely not." Chapter 8. Lily Waters has a scar on her back, a knife wound, from her shoulder to her lower back, which she sustained deflecting a blade for Ethan. That was at the beginning of last year. Ethan suddenly went crazy competing with me for business. He was willing to lose 1,000 to hurt me 800. He didn't see me, didn't answer my calls, didn't give me any explanation or reason. Until 3 months later, someone revealed to me that he had been attacked, and he thought I had instigated it. The absurdity of that moment made me laugh. I spent a week investigating the matter, and threw the people involved to Ethan. He was silent for a long time, then wiped his face. My fault. I was out of my mind. "So, you think your sense of trust started to collapse from then on?" I didn't answer the man's question. Looking ahead, I said faintly, "Did Ethan suddenly transferring to the same elementary school with me, was that your arrangement?" "Yes." "Why?" "To fool you, his mom wanted to be top dog, so she had to break things down piece by piece. His mom said that kid has always been a charmer, saying what people want to hear. As long as he wants, he can get everyone to follow him. Like me. He would tie my shoelaces, chase away the fat bully who harassed me, carry me home on snowy days, and save the only chocolate for me, even though he wanted to pick up food from the ground to eat himself. The man chewed on a cigarette, squinting at the sun. I remember you used to carry a whole backpack full of snacks and fruits every day, all for him, right? See, ever since he latched onto you, he doesn't even have to charm the old ladies upstairs and downstairs. Hearing what I wanted to hear, I stood up, ready to leave. Hey. The man called me. I'm out of money, give me some more. Wait until next month. The man's face darkened. I'm your dad. That's why I'm giving you alimony every month. That little money isn't even enough for me to eat. The things your grandparents left behind were originally mine. I haven't died yet, why should you inherit them? If you don't give me money, I'll go back home. I hooked the corners of my mouth. No problem, you get off the plane, and I'll put you inside. The man gritted his teeth, glaring at me. Suddenly, a malicious smile flashed across his face. Do you know why his mom didn't leave him a penny when she ran away with me? Because he said he liked you and wouldn't plot against you again. If he's with you, his mom would really have no chance to marry into a wealthy family, so wouldn't she beat him to death? Hiss, how did his mom put it? Oh yeah, you're so capable, right? $10 should be enough for you to live on. That kid was tough, didn't say a word, and refused to ask for forgiveness. Instantly, my face fell. Congratulations, you've lost half of your living expenses for next month. On the plane back, I didn't say a word. Kyle looked at me worriedly. Shannon, you're in a bad mood every time you see him, why do you still come? Why? Kyle didn't understand. In fact, I didn't understand it myself at first. Until later when the man revealed it. What do you want to hear? Hear me say that all the good he did for you back then was fake? Do you want to prove that he doesn't like you now, because he never really liked you back then? Shannon, you're a love-obsessed idiot. Because his language was too crude, I also reduced his living expenses by half that month. This person is my dad, who ran away with Ethan's mom. My mom was a pure, love-obsessed idiot. Even though my dad ran away with someone else, she still transferred a huge sum of money into his account every month. Then she worked hard, managing the Fisher family business. In the end, she had a big problem. She suffered from cancer but didn't seek treatment, just letting herself die, leaving only one last words, let you go, and let myself go. My dad's comment on this was, sick. What kind of relationship did they have? An arranged marriage set up by the family. If he didn't marry, they would cut off his source of income. Even the child was conceived through artificial insemination. In my dad's eyes, my mom was just a nobody. He felt that all the money she gave him was something he deserved. I couldn't stand him being so carefree. The month my mom died, I cut off his living expenses. He howled, jumped, and cursed. Saying that I wouldn't have a good death. Saying that I wouldn't let the people underground rest in peace. I laughed. It's only right that they don't rest in peace. The second month I cut off his living expenses, Ethan's mom abandoned my dad and followed someone else. Back then, because his family cut off his source of income, my dad abandoned his first love, Ethan's mom, and married my mom. Now, again because of this pittance of money, Ethan's mom abandoned my dad. The show made me clap and cheer. Let them do whatever they want. Only one thing, he's not allowed to return home. Chapter 9. I called Ethan, and he answered after a long time. His voice was a little hoarse, full of fatigue. Speak. I've cleared out all your belongings from the villa, they're in the yard, you can send someone to move them. Got it. The company we co-financed, the joint investments, I drafted a charter, I'll send it to your email later, you need to give me a reply as soon as possible. Ethan's silence this time was longer than last time. Is it necessary? I rubbed my eyebrows. Let's cut ties cleanly. When I saw Ethan again, his arm was in a cast, strapped to his neck with bandages, accompanied by Lily Waters. Wes said that I had been quite ruthless, but fortunately it was clean and neat, and it wouldn't affect his future life. I expressed my regret about this. Wes glared. Most venomous is a woman's heart. But it was what he deserved. We were very calm as we handled the division of assets. In order to handle these matters, I signed one signature after another, stamped one seal after another, until I was numb. Kyle took the coat and draped it over me. I took the water glass and took a sip. Looking up, I saw Lily standing not far away, timidly. I nodded to her and started to walk out. Miss Fisher. I hummed in response. Ethan is in the back, he should be out soon. No, I have a few words I want to say to you. Kyle blocked her with a grim face. Lily staggered, almost falling, but stubbornly stuck her neck out. I sighed and patted Kyle. Say it. She bit her lip. I didn't know you had that kind of relationship, I'm sorry. But no one has ever been so nice to me, only him, I don't want to give up. Miss Fisher, I'm sorry. As she spoke, she bowed to me 90 degrees. I stepped aside to avoid it. You don't have to do this. What you do is none of my business. Just like what happened between him and me is none of your business. Ethan heard the whole thing behind me, leaning against the wall with a cigarette in his mouth, expressionless. The problem between Ethan and me didn't arise because of Lily Waters' appearance. It's just that we had differences of opinion, just that we had gaps, just that we had resentment. Someone didn't believe it. No way, you were willing to give up your life for Shannon back then. Ethan smoked his cigarette, his expression indifferent. Was I? I forgot. Chapter 10. My breakup with Ethan was clean, neat, and silent. This surprised everyone. After all, I used to be extremely possessive. Whenever someone dared to approach Ethan, I would unhesitatingly invite them out. Now, I spread my hands, and became a bystander, so someone started testing the waters again. Seeing that I really didn't care, they became even more presumptuous. Lily couldn't handle these things well. Ethan was being hit on inside, and she was hiding outside crying. Seeing me come out, she quickly wiped away her tears. I pretended not to see it and continued to walk forward. But she trotted after me. I didn't want to pay attention to her, but I saw her suddenly fall down, clutching her chest, her expression painful, as if she couldn't breathe. What's wrong? While calling for help, I called Ethan. Ethan hurriedly came out, fed her a pill, and Lily finally fell into a deep sleep. She has heart disease, it's congenital, her health has always been very poor. I wasn't interested in any of this. But I couldn't help but sting Ethan. You want others to be forever pure, but you can't protect anyone. You're so interesting. In the darkness, I couldn't clearly see Ethan's expression. I didn't want to see it either, turning to leave. On the car, Kyle kept looking at me through the rearview mirror. Ask what you want to ask. Shannon, you don't seem to hate Lily, is it my imagination? I looked out the window, exhaling a mouthful of turbid air. She's a bit like the me of the past. Not at all. Kyle said with a wooden face, very childishly. I chuckled. You know shit. She's like me before I met Kyle. At that time, I was so naive that I was a little stupid, ignorant of the world, and I felt happy even eating steamed buns with Ethan. Living in a narrow bungalow, the socket on the head of the bed was broken, and rats always crawled out of it, dancing on your quilt. I was so scared that I cried. Ethan bought cement, sealed the hole, and used the rest to make me a flower pot. I planted strawberries in it, and took care of them carefully every day. But before the strawberries could bear fruit, he was surrounded by a group of people. Ethan told me to run, don't look back. But I stood in front of him and took a stick for him. Wes said that Ethan almost killed someone. If he had, he would have been finished. His whole life would have been over. For the first time, I felt scared. I started thinking about what I could do for Ethan. I didn't want to obediently listen to him and hide behind him anymore. I also wanted to protect him the way he protected me. That seemed to be the beginning of everything, and also the end of something. Chapter 11. On the day of my mom's death anniversary, I pushed aside all my work, bought flowers early, and went to the cemetery. For this mother, my feelings were quite complicated. Since I was little, she had spent very little time with me. In that limited time, she never got close to me either. The housekeeper said that seeing me would remind her of my father, and she could only numb herself with work. She didn't live happily, I never saw her smile. Until she died, she never really looked at me. I hated, resented, and disliked her, but in the end, when people die, they disappear like a light. Putting the flowers in front of the grave, I found a clean place to sit down. What do you like about him? No skills, no ability, apart from being able to paint, he only has a good appearance. He said you didn't even meet before you got married, you're probably liking the wrong person. Anyway, find someone who likes you in your next life. Also, be nicer to your children in your next life. Chattering away, I didn't even know what I was saying. I even took a nap in the middle. When the sun was hanging in the west, I patted my butt and walked out of the cemetery. Kyle opened the car door and let me in. I closed my eyes and leaned against the car window. Kyle. Yeah. Don't stay with me anymore, go do your own thing. Helping you is what I want to do, you are yourself first, it would be meaningless if you lived as my appendage. After a long time, Kyle said in a muffled voice, okay. Chapter 12. My life continued on smoothly. I was a little dazed when I received Ethan's call again. I could hear his heavy breathing, but he didn't say a word. If you don't speak, I'm hanging up. Shannon, Granny Jo is gone. Okay, here's the rest of the translation. This sudden news made my heart skip a beat. Granny Jo used to live downstairs from Ethan. In those years when Ethan was deliberately ignored by his mom, freezing and starving, Granny Jo gave him food, gave him shelter, and sewed his clothes. Later, he didn't have too much contact with Granny Jo, just buying some things during the holidays and stopping by to visit. Some people said he was a grateful person. At first, I thought so too. It wasn't until later that I slowly realized that he seemed to treat Granny Zhou as an elder in the family. Having that one person there was like having a root of his own. Now that his root was gone, what would he do? Fear? Panic? For a moment, I didn't even know what to say. I opened my mouth, and finally spat out 2 words. Condolences. I slept very poorly that night. I had met that old lady a few times. She had a bad temper and was a bit stingy. She would suddenly slap Ethan. "Can't you stop smoking, you're suffocating me." Ethan always sucked in a breath of cold air. "You old woman, don't you know you have a broken palm?" In front of Granny Zhou, Ethan always had a bit of childishness. She separated us from death, making us feel like it was something very far away. But when this person was gone, and we had to face death directly, even I felt a little inexplicably flustered. In the early morning, Wes' phone woke me up. Before I could explode, he opened his mouth anxiously. "Ethan is missing. Has he contacted you? Granny Zhou is gone, did you know?" I hummed in response. Wes seemed to breathe a sigh of relief. "I knew it. It was a bit noisy over there, it sounded like Lily was crying." "Wait a minute. Wes must have gone to another place," he asked me. "Did he tell you where he went?" "Ethan's in a pretty bad state, we're all a little worried." "He didn't tell me." "Then do you know where he would go?" Wes' words made me pause. I lifted the covers and got out of bed, opened the door, and Ethan fell in so unexpectedly. His brows were deeply furrowed, his eyelids were twitching but not opening, and his face had an abnormal flush. He had a fever. With a cold face, I said sternly to the other end of the phone, "He's here with me, come pick him up." They came very quickly. Led by Wes, Lily was also among them. Her face was pale, teetering, as if she was about to faint in the next second. The look in her eyes when she looked at me was very complicated. Finally, she took Ethan's hand and left without saying a word. Wes wiped the sweat that didn't even exist from his forehead, and gave me a thumbs up. "You're really amazing, his arm is still injured, and you just let him lie on the ground like that?" I was expressionless. "You get out too." "Okay." Chapter 13. No one mentioned the events of that night again. Ethan's appearance was like an illusion. When we met again, we were still strangers. Wes said that I was quite ruthless, so many years of feelings, saying I would let go and letting go, without a trace of attachment. "With someone like you, what great things can't be accomplished? Are you bored?" "Definitely not." He said that their hospital had a tour of medical care to remote areas recently, and asked if I was interested in sponsoring it. I pondered for a moment. "Okay, I'll have someone contact your hospital." Kneeling in gratitude to the sugar daddy, "By the way, if you have time, you can also follow the medical team. The mountains are beautiful, the folk customs are simple, it's the most suitable for relaxing." My heart warmed. "Got it. I've been too busy recently, and I thought I really should go out and take a walk." After finishing the social engagement in the evening, CEO Zheng's youngest son offered to take me home. He was in his 20s, and his thoughts were written all over his face. It was hard to refuse, so I could only agree. Along the way, he tried to strike up a conversation with me, but I blocked them all. When we arrived at the destination, he was a little disappointed. "Do you think I'm too young?" I smiled. "It's just that you're originally very young. You're just temporarily infatuated with me now, it comes quickly and goes quickly." "Okay, thank you for today, goodbye." He puffed out his cheeks and turned around, took 2 steps, and then suddenly turned around and hugged me. Before I could react, he let go again. "No thanks, goodbye." I was a little confused, until his car drove away, then I shook my head and sighed. But the next day, I heard that he had been beaten. Someone stopped his car and beat him up in a sack. He wasn't seriously injured, but it really hurt. CEO Zheng was furious, saying that he must find these people and not let them go. I raised my eyes and looked at the surveillance photos that were printed out on the table. Almost all of them were back views. But one person made my gaze fixate. After many days, I rushed into Ethan's office again, almost unimpeded. He leaned back, raised his eyes to look at me, as if he wasn't surprised at all by my arrival. I coldly asked him, "Did you beat Jing Xiao?" "Who?" "Don't deny it, I saw number 5. "I'm not denying it, I just didn't know his name was Jing Xiao." "You don't even know his name, why would you tell people to beat him?" I looked straight at Ethan. "He was beaten on the way back after dropping me off, is it because of me? Or is it my imagination?" Ethan didn't dodge or evade, even with a bit of frankness. "It's not your imagination, it's that you have a problem with your brain. Shannon, do you think everyone around you is a good person? When did you become someone who doesn't avoid people touching you? He dared to hug you today, will he have other intentions tomorrow? Do I still need to teach you these things?" We stared at each other. His hardness and my coldness. Neither of us would give in. I opened my mouth, but what does it have to do with you? What? Ethan, my business is none of your business, stop spying on my life. Chapter 14. Ethan bought the villa across from me. After I called him out on his spying, he didn't hide it anymore, he greeted me directly at the door. I could always run into him in a lot of inexplicable places, he even helped me block drinks at a charity gala. This made my face more and more gloomy. Finally, I started to make things difficult. After I continuously snatched several of his projects, he called me, his voice even with joy. Are you less angry? Ethan, if you're sick, go get treatment, don't be cheap here. He tsked and wanted to say something, but I had already hung up the phone. Lily found me suddenly one afternoon. Waiting from 2 in the afternoon to 8 in the evening, insisting on seeing me. Finally, she directly blocked my car. I looked at her with an indifferent expression. She was wrapped in tears, with a face of determination. I like Ethan, this is the first time I've liked someone so much. He appeared in front of me like a savior, treating me and taking care of me. I thought he liked me too. But he never touches me, he just likes to look at me in a daze. I thought he was concerned about my health. It's because I'm like you, right? Tears streamed down, Lily couldn't stop crying. You broke up, and I thought I had a chance, even if I was like you, even if I was your substitute, I didn't care. But do you know how many times he called me by the wrong name? When he was drunk, waking up from a dream, looking at my back, he called your name again and again. Shannon, I lost, I'll give him back to you. I was a little tired. Not physically tired. But the feeling of exhaustion rising from the bottom of my heart. What conditions did Ethan offer you? What? Without his arrangement, you wouldn't be able to get to me. Lily's body trembled, and her face was pale. She remembered that night. She took off her clothes and climbed onto Ethan's bed. Her crying, pleading, getting close, Ethan was unmoved. Finally, he coldly pushed her away. Don't degrade yourself. Lily cried in despair. If you don't like me, why are you so nice to me? You take care of me, protect me, even broke up with Shannon for me, you obviously have feelings for me, why are you treating me like this now? Ethan was silent for a long time. The way you play the piano is very similar to her, but she hurt her hand and can't play anymore. When you blocked the knife for me, it was exactly the same as her, and you were more obedient and more well-behaved than her, so I thought this was the best combination. But it doesn't seem right. Lily, can you go find Shannon? You go find her, and I guarantee you a carefree next life. Otherwise? Lily didn't know. She just suddenly felt a chill. It was like a poisonous snake spitting out its forked tongue, about to bite her neck in the next second. Chapter 15. On the 9th day of being on guard against Ethan. Coming home in the evening, he greeted me from the second floor across the street. I didn't pay attention to him and dragged my luggage to leave. But Ethan stood in front of the car. Get out of the way. No. What do you want? Let's talk. There's nothing to talk about. Then drive over me. Like you did when you drove at me before? Ethan frowned. You should understand that I'm just bluffing, I can't really run you over. Taking a deep breath, cold air poured in from my nostrils. Ethan, I don't believe you. Just like you don't believe me. We should just break up and never see each other again. When did the sense of trust collapse? It's been a long time since I traced back. When I started to take over the company's affairs, learning to manage and do business, people's way of thinking began to change. At that time, Ethan wanted to participate in a high-investment, high-return business, the risk was too great. I didn't want him to go, and gave him the pros and cons. He couldn't listen to a word. He even said, "Are you afraid that I'll succeed, or are you afraid that I won't succeed?" One sentence ignited my anger. I said angrily, "If you dare to go, even if you succeed, I can make you lose everything." Someone my dad, once said to me that men don't like women who are too strong. The higher they stand, the more they hope that everything is in their control. For those who are out of control, they either stay away, or are afraid and destroy them. I didn't believe it before. I always thought that Ethan and I would be that exception. It wasn't until later that I realized that we were just the most ordinary of all living beings. Returning from the business trip was 2 days later. I fell on the bed as soon as I got home. I don't know how long it was, but the urgent ringing of the phone woke me up. Hello? Shannon, my house is on fire. Can you come save me? If you don't save me, I'm going to burn to death. With a buzzing sound, my mind exploded. Stumbling to the window, I saw the raging fire that had already ignited across the street. I ran downstairs without time to put on my shoes, almost tumbling down the stairs. Hello, is this 119? Nanyuan is on fire, please come quickly. Hello, 120. Is this the security hall? Building 2 is on fire. Wes, Ethan is looking for death, come collect his body. Ethan was still conscious when he was rescued. He stubbornly grabbed me, saying in a hoarse voice, "You didn't come." I stood there woodenly, my voice even hoarser than his. "Ethan, you asked me back then, she can block a knife for you, can I?" I said I can't, and it wasn't out of anger. When I was 18, I ran to him without hesitation. Now, I weigh the pros and cons, calculating gains and losses. Chapter 16. The therapist once told me that the only constant in this world is change. The fact that he once loved you deeply and that his love has faded now is not in conflict. It doesn't mean that everything in the past was fake just because he doesn't love you now. Including you, has your love for him diminished at all? Ethan stayed in the hospital for a week, and I didn't visit him once. I moved, and lived near the company. Then I joined the tour of medical care in West Hospital. Following the bus ran several places. Free clinics can always encounter all kinds of people, one of the little doctors helplessly said. This grandma insists that she is sick, but her various indicators are really better than mine. I curved the corners of my mouth. People start to fear death when they reach a certain age. Really? I'm not afraid. Yeah, I wasn't afraid either when I was in my 20s. What about now? A little bit. In the middle, Wes called me once and asked when I was going back. You don't have to follow the whole process, are you not caring about the company? If I have to care about everything, are they just eating for free? Why don't you answer old man Sterling's calls? His condition isn't right, I'm afraid something will happen to him. Speaking of which, isn't it just because of Lily? Old man Sterling didn't make any mistakes in principle, at most it's just repaying a debt of gratitude. Give him a chance? You have so many years of relationship, it's a pity. Here's the final part of the translation. Even just hearing Ethan's name now made my heart feel heavy. That great fire that night. I stood outside the fire, feeling the heat wave that burned the skin, and my whole body was trembling. I was afraid. Was Ethan afraid? Years ago, he was able to rush into the thick smoke and raging fire to carry me out. He told me not to be afraid, but I knew he was also shaking. That used to be the nightmare of both of us. But now, he was reliving the old events. Was he forcing me? Or did he want to prove something? I didn't want to investigate. I didn't even want to think deeply. Between Ethan and me, it was hard to say. Chapter 17. I saw Ethan again in a small village. Coming out from eating dinner at a nearby farmhouse, I raised my eyes and saw him. Leaning against a tree, his expression listless, he had lost weight. He was following me not too far, not too close. The little doctor asked, "Miss Fisher, is that your friend?" Acquaintance. Ethan was very quiet, no one talked to him. But he would take the initiative to lend a hand when anyone was busy. But because he was too cold, everyone was a little afraid of him. 4 days passed peacefully and uneventfully. Finally, he knocked on my hotel room door. We were probably both at our breaking point. Stepping aside, I let him into the room. The first thing Ethan said to me was, "I'm sorry." I exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. "Then you should stay away from me." "I'm afraid I can't." "Ethan, what do you want?" He looked at me, his eyes sunken, full of exhaustion. "I want to be with you, I want us to start over." "Impossible." "What if I insist?" "If it was Lily, if you insisted, you would have 100 ways to trap her. But me, Ethan, you can't do anything to me. So, don't force me to deal a death blow to you." Ethan's phone rang at this moment. Mine rang at the same time. Kyle said, "Shannon, it's done." I hummed in response, and looked at Ethan. His face was ugly, and he didn't say a word. Kyle's actions were enough to seriously injure Ethan, this was my warning to him. I needed him to respect me and stay away from me, not to harass me again. Ethan staggered to his feet, his face pale, and he laughed ugliness. Everyone advised me not to do things I would regret, I didn't believe them. Shannon, I regret it. Chapter 18. No one knew what Ethan regretted. Whether it was regretting the Lily affair, or regretting drifting away from me over the years, or regretting being with me, or even meeting me. It was unknown. Life returned to normal. Ethan and I hardly ever met. Wes no longer talked to me about Ethan either. Just often hesitated to speak and shook his head and sighed. My dad later called me once, quite gloating. "You really broke up? No getting back together?" I said you wouldn't last long. "Shannon, you have a hard heart, harder than me and your mom." I laughed. "A heart? Do you have that? Aren't you a selfish and self-centered person who only loves yourself?" The man was silent for a moment. "Do you think Ethan isn't? Including you. To expect parents like us to raise 2 lovebirds is laughable." Yes, my family had no affection to speak of. Even more so for Ethan. After his mom broke up with my dad, she started courting sugar daddies. She courted many people. Spreading the net wide, dreaming of catching a big one. Later, she became pregnant, hoping to rely on the child to return home. She waited until her belly was so big that she couldn't have an abortion before going to make things difficult. In fact, she wasn't sure who the father of the child was, so she picked the richest and most powerful one. But before she could get any benefits, she was beaten out by the original wife. The dream of marrying into a wealthy family shattered, the child could only be born. So, she vented all her hatred and dissatisfaction on this child. Until she reunited with my dad. Until Ethan and I met. I thought, maybe neither of us knew how to love. But we always expected someone to love us. Maybe the hope was too great, maybe the expectations were too much. In the end, we could only end up in a bleak way. A year and a half later, Ethan passed away. I was in a meeting at the time. The secretary whispered the news to me. I paused for 2 seconds and signaled the meeting to continue. That day, I completed all the work without any mistakes. Returning home in the evening, I sat on the terrace with a blanket for a long time. Wes said it was cancer. It was late stage when it was discovered. Incurable, Ethan didn't want to be treated either. He left quickly, without suffering much. Shannon, condolences. Kyle ran over, panting. Without approaching me, he stood behind me all the time. I didn't expect him to die. Even if we were at odds, disintegrated, he should have lived to a ripe old age. You said, people's lives are so hard, why do they still want to live? I don't know. Kyle's voice was muffled. I only know that since I'm alive, then I have to live well. I had a serious illness, deliriously burning for a week. Wes and Kyle kept watch over me in shifts. Aren't you afraid that I'll commit suicide? You're overthinking it. Just like Kyle said, since I'm alive, then I have to live well. When that day really comes when I die, then this life won't be in vain. People are always circling around. The only one you can love is yourself, and the only one who can love yourself is yourself. The end.